Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Public Sector Catering Hospital Food Review webinar. We'll be starting the webinar shortly. We're just going to let people log in first. We have about 400 people registered for today's event, so it might take a minute or so for people to log in. Your panel today, well, we start today with an interview with the Chair of the Hospital Food Review, Phil Shelley, and then we'll have a panel discussion which will include Paul Freeston, CEO of Apetito UK, and Craig Smith, National Chair of the Hospital Caterers Association. If you have questions when we reach the Q&A stage, please use the Q&A button to post the questions. Do not use the chat because we won't pick them up from the chat. So please use the Q&A button. But please introduce yourself so people know who's online by using the chat feature and pass any comments to each other that way. So we're up over the 200 mark now and still rising. So we'll give it another few seconds before we pass over to David Fode, who will be chairing today's webinar. Okay. Right, I think we're about ready to go. I'm sure a few more people will log in. So I will now pass over to David Fode.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Fode, editor of Public Sector Catering magazine, and thank you for joining us today for a special webinar we've organised to talk about the report of the Independent Review of Hospital Food, which was published just yesterday. The process began just over a year ago when Health Secretary Matt Hancock asked Phil Shelley, a recent chair of the Hospital Caterers Association, to lead the review following the deaths of 6 people linked to an outbreak of listeria in contaminated food. As you know, celebrity chef Prue Leith was appointed to act as an advisor, having spoken out previously about the need for hospitals to provide healthy food tailored to the individual needs of each patient. The brief they were given, though, was not narrowly focused on the listeria outbreak. Instead, they were asked to carry out a wholesale review of food quality and standards for patients, staff, and visitors. Everything was ready for publication back in March, only for the arrival of the coronavirus to draw the full attention of the government and the NHS as the country went into lockdown. Amid much anticipation in the NHS and the wider public sector, the report is now with us, and we're lucky enough today to be joined by the chair of that review, Phil Shelley, together with Craig Smith, chair of the Hospital Caterers Association, and Paul Freeston, chief executive of Apetito Limited, the meals and services provider to the healthcare industry. In a moment, we're going to play an interview I had with Phil at the end of last week. After that, I'll get the reactions of the panel to what they've heard, and then we'll open up the discussion to taking questions from the webinar audience today. Before we do that, a quick reminder about how the webinar is going to work. Other than the panelists and me, everyone will be muted. If you want to get in touch during the webinar, there are 2 ways. To put a question to the panelists, use the Q&A function, making sure, please, to include your name and company. And we would ask that you keep this to questions rather than comments or statements. You can post a question at any time. There's no need to wait until the end of the video. The other way to get involved is to share a comment, and we encourage you to do this too. Please use the chat function to do that. And remember to use the option to all panelists and attendees. We won't, unfortunately, be able to answer any questions that you post to chat. Right. Phil Shelley is the Deputy Head of Facilities at Somerset NHS Foundation Trust and was the Chair of the Hospital Caterers Association from 2015 to 2017. He joined the Taunton and Somerset NHS Foundation Trust in 1992 and has been with them since in a variety of catering and facilities roles. He is also an Associate Board Member of the Malnutrition Task Force and a Love British Food Ambassador. And of course, he is the chair of the Independent National Hospital Food Review. Let's hear what he had to say about that when I spoke to him last week. Good morning, Phil. How are you?
Yeah, good morning, David. I'm fine, thank you.
Excellent. Right. All ready for the big reveal on Monday.
Yes, it's a nervous time. Not really sure why, but it's such a big build-up, and we've had obviously that longer break than we anticipated. But it's exciting, but of course, a little bit of nervousness.
Yeah, of course, that's understandable. Right. I guess we'll just kick off with a sort of getting you to give us a broad outline of the sort of the process that you followed that gave you the platform to come up with the review that you've done.
Yeah, of course. Well, we know that in the summer of last year, there was an outbreak of Listerius, which seven patients tragically died after eating hospital sandwiches contaminated with Listeria and monocytogens. I mean, following this, Matt Hancock quite quickly announced a root and branch review of food served and sold in hospitals. The scope of the review was to include safety, nutrition, quality, production methods for both patient, staff, and visitors served in NHS hospitals. But there were a few weeks kind of before, obviously, I was contacted, first of all, by Simon Corbin, who's the director and head of profession for NHSI. He asked if I was willing to chair an independent review following the outbreak. And then there were contacts where my name went forward to both Simon Stevens and Matt Hancock. And after a few weeks, I was given the go-ahead to form, first of all, an appropriate panel, recommend an advisor, and then with a view to write a report over a 4 or 5 month period.
Okay, now the review process took you to a number of different hospitals on site visits.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that sort of you noticed and possibly surprised you on these visits?
I think it was important for both myself and panel members who were given that opportunity to be part of the visit is to go in with an open mind. But there were a number of points that I really would like to share. I mean, first of all, the quality of food being produced. You know, we have a range of systems in place throughout the country. Generally, standards were very high, although sometimes we saw elements that could be improved. Another thing was the openness from the teams. You know, conversations took place with wide-ranging teams, from chief exec to chief nurse, dietetic leads, caterers and managers likewise, as well as at ward level. And they were really open to the challenges ahead, even though there may be a possible shift of direction for them. I think probably the most disappointing element was seeing kitchens and retail areas that were in need of refurbishment and repair. And this was either structurally or it was probably dated equipment, which inevitably dictates decision making. And I think the one thing that was kind of all the way through the program is the pride and the loyalty, you know, either in production, in teamwork, in the presentation skills and communication. So there were lots of things that we saw, but for me, those 4 things were probably sticking in my mind.
Okay, now your review will obviously have a number of ideas about how to address some of these issues that you found. What would you identify as possibly the most important findings and proposals that you've got?
Well, as soon as it was formally agreed that I would lead the review, it was very important for me to listen, first of all. Listen, respect those as well that have been involved before the setting and refreshing of these standards that are coming before us as well. So, for example, I spoke for a long length of time with Dame Diane Jeffrey, you know, and what we didn't want to do is forget all the good things that we've learned through other standards and other reviews. But I was always keen to express that although this has been done before, this is going to be different. So a few areas, but first of all, I mean, food safety in hospitals, that is got to be at the very highest level. And I think for me, what came across is that too many trusts see it purely in the realm of a catering team. That's where it sits. That is not our problem. But we've got to remind people going forward, it's everybody's responsibility. So I felt one of the messages that needs to come out is that it is essential that trusts and suppliers work together to regain the public confidence that food served in hospitals meets the very highest standard of food safety. We've used a description on a number of occasions as well of one size doesn't fit all. And, we need to understand the variances and the ranges of different challenges that are out there. It's not just about acute hospitals, it's about community and mental health. We need to transform our services through skills, investment and technology. And there may just be slightly different ways that we do that in each setting. And I think finally, as an expert group, we need to spend that time revisiting teams in the future to communicate to caterers that throughout the country, let's understand the direction that they desire to go. Let's try and support them and take them forward in the appropriate manner.
Okay. Now, obviously, you won't want this review to be just another report that's published and then sits on the shelf somewhere gathering dust. So how do you hope that it will help trusts and caterers to change if necessary and to work better in the future?
Well, we are the ones best placed if we want to raise the skills profile of caterers in healthcare. We mustn't wait for someone else to do it. Now is the time. There's a desire and a backing to have regional and national competitions for example, NHS Chef or Team of the Year. And what we've got to do is make it happen. Have the time to do it, drive the ambition to bring it forward as quickly as we can. I've met a number of managers and caterers that are natural innovators. They are driving change in hospitals and trusts. And above all, they show fantastic leadership qualities. They're often in the most challenging circumstances, and yet they're able to innovate. So this needs to be shared and it needs to be promoted. And I believe that the recommendations will strengthen the awareness on food safety, team structure, capital investment, the way that we use digital and technology, as well as costs and food waste controls.
Okay. Do you believe that hospital caterers will welcome the review when they see it?
I hope so. I hope so. And no doubt people will tell us what they think. But having worked with chefs, managers, caterers in different fields of healthcare, dietitians and nurses across the country, it is recognised that this review is required. Facilities teams are incredibly resourceful. We've seen that particularly during COVID. And throughout the changes that have taken place in recent years in NHS, caterers have deserved enormous credit. Their determination to succeed, no matter what gets put in front of them. And what I hope is that we can provide a consistent support on direction, improvement, and it will also reflect a togetherness that the central team at NHSI promotes. Sometimes there is a little link there that gets lost, and I think now is that opportunity to join NHSI, DOH and caterers in healthcare together.
Okay. Can you give us an example or two maybe of the changes that you hope will come about now?
Well, you know that I've long promoted the strengthening of collaboration between caterers, dietitians and nursing teams. And the strap line of the Power of Three is something that we all know about. But interestingly enough, when we talk to politicians and leaders that are outside the catering circle, they've never heard of it. And it is something that they have picked up and they will promote during the launch. So first of all, I think it's great that those outside of our circle understand that that is key to success. We must also drive the strengths of our member organisations. So, for example, the Hospital Caterers Association, we need people to desire to be part of that, because that will reinforce the association and also our position within trust to say, I belong to an organisation that nationally is driving change. So I would expect, for example, all EFM directors to fully support professional membership for catering colleagues. Food and drink for patient staff and visitors, there's a really good knowledge about what we do. But in some trusts, the boards were quite distant around their knowledge. And I think we have to make it our aim that if boards don't go to ward level to see the food and drink, we need to take it to them. It's our service. We need to show it off. So that is a big step for people to make. It's vital that whatever you produce, it needs to be shared with your leadership team, so they understand the level of quality being created and the hard work that goes on. I think whatever your style of service, there needs to be innovation. Anyone that says there's no innovation with cook freeze or cook chill or plated service, I just don't buy it at all. Whether we have finishing kitchens or we have a chef that goes to ward level at meal times, or we have things like seasonal menus, there are different ways that we can innovate. And I think finally, we need a commitment from those in authority to measure appropriately and then challenge NHS catering effectively. So the CQC, the Food Standards Agency, and NHS Improvement, they are people that can often criticise what we do, but I think it is better for them to understand fully what we do so they can also support us.
Okay, now you mentioned that Matt Hancock was quick in acting to set up the review. Do you believe now that the government will back the review and find funding if it's thought necessary?
Well, as an independent report, there was never going to be a guarantee that some or all of the recommendations were going to be supported. And I had to accept that really from day one. But both the Secretary of State and Joe Churchill, who's the Minister for Public Health, they've made themselves available when possible to frequently view and discuss progress reports. And after seeing the final report, I received their full backing on the recommendations. I couldn't have asked for any more support, really. They've been incredibly encouraging. The next step, of course, will be after the launch is understanding how we will be supported going forward. So the impending spending review will give the government the opportunity to show their financial backing of what we're asking for. So we will be in that little bit of a time lag of waiting a few weeks before they actually show their trump card.
Okay. Now we're reaching the sharp point when it comes to reaching a trade deal with the EU or not. Do you have any concerns about food supply issues, quality issues, and might there be an impact on your ambitions for the review as a result of that?
Well, Brexit will continue to provide an uncertainty, certainly on potential supply issues. I mean, suppliers to the NHS have already proved that they are well prepared. Their contingency planning schedule certainly gives me confidence around healthcare arrangements. Their support mechanisms over the last 12 months when we first started to plan around Brexit, all of us certainly felt more confident when we shared those plans with suppliers. And caterers as well are incredibly capable. What we must do is maintain strong communication through the procurement channels. We may need to flex menus appropriately. What we must do is work with dietetic teams to maintain balance in choices. So, okay, flex your menus, but have that confidence that what we do still maintains a choice and availability and a balance that patients require. But overall, I think we're as prepared as we can be, and there is a lot of work going on in the background, particularly through NHS improvement, to ensure that as caterers we are supported in the right way.
Okay. Now, let's move on to the review process itself. How will you be able to ensure that the sort of the standards and the ideas that you're putting forward will be put into place, and what checks will there be on things like food quality, for instance, and quality of service?
I think this will be twofold, David. As chair, I've been asked to develop a small expert group, and there will be a call to arms following the launch for people to apply for that expert group. This will drive recommendations and the chief exec checklist that's in the report. It needs to be actioned in a timely manner. I'm working closely with Emma Brooks in NHSI and a number of colleagues in our industry around the forthcoming food standards. They're being finalised at this current time. They will link effectively into the recommendations so we can efficiently map out progress. I'll also be keeping the Department of Health up to speed to ensure that the time that has been invested proves worthwhile. I've always hoped that people want the review, but what people will want more than anything is for it to make a difference and for it to set a timeline to see that people are being able to map their own progress against the recommendations.
Okay. And finally, just a question about the little bit of celebrity stardust that was sprinkled on your review panel by including Prue Leith. I just wondered how it was working with her and what benefit the review had from her involvement.
Well, I've got to say, Prue has been what I would call an exceptional colleague and ally in the review. You can't help but think that there was a bit of doubt around a celebrity status for the review. But once it was announced, her and I spent a lot of time on the phone in that first week, where she really wanted to make it clear that I was the chair and she was the advisor. She didn't want to interfere. She understood what her role was. And as you said, it is around sprinkling that little bit of glitter and that know-how. How can she raise the profile when necessary? And more importantly than anything, she would be instrumental in gaining the backing from the politicians when required. So we haven't got into that point where we've lost a bit of confidence, and that's when we could, drag her into, shout from the mountaintops. But she's been there pushing and pushing to ensure that we get that commitment. We've made a pretty good team, and she has said that she will continue to support me and advise me through the expert group, which certainly gives me more confidence. We've both got a passion to succeed. We are very determined, some would say stubborn, but I think most of all, we understand that this review must be different. It will provide a solid platform of expectation. We recognise that all involved with NHS catering must have an accountability. We've got to trust that working together with the applicable standards that will come out shortly, it will help us show a maturity on how we adapt and improve in all aspects of catering throughout healthcare.
That's terrific, Phil. That's set us up really nicely for the Q&A session that's to follow. Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Right, and we're back live now. Before we take the first question, I'd like to ask the panel for their sort of initial thoughts on hearing what Phil has had to say. Craig, could we kick off with you, please?
Okay, well, I first of all just want to pay tribute to Phil as being the chair on this. It's been a long road. It's been longer than we anticipated because of COVID. So it was really nice to see that that we were able to release the report yesterday and with the fanfare that we'd hoped for. And yes, I mean, I'm personally I'm pleased with the report as it came out. Phil said, you know, will the hospital caterers be happy with it? Well, I echo his comment. I hope so, because I think it's a really good thing for us. And it, as he says, reinforces our position as an integral part of the patient's care. And that's really important to us.
All right, thank you. Paul, how about you? What's your reaction? Paul, I think you're muted at the moment.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, like Craig, first of all, congratulations to Phil and indeed Dr. Prue and the whole panel on getting this report going. And I think what's been really struck me in the sort of very limited direct interaction I've had is how much time has been spent visiting a huge number of hospitals and you know, so it's rather than starting with preconceptions, it was starting with gaining and building understanding, and I think that's a really impressive part of it. I think the focus, I think we've often had sort of quite a negative discussion about this, which system is best and all that sort of thing, and I think what this has come away saying, there's not a one-size-fits-all thing, but the focus is a lot to do with making it happen on the ground, and that, you know, whether it's a fresh cook system or a bought-in system, if executed really well, they can both be absolutely superb from a patient's perspective. And, you know, I think the focus on things like skills, investment and technology is really, really important. And I particularly add, Phil mentioned, I think wastage, he may have said sustainability, but the whole broad sustainability thing, I think that's going to become more and more and more important in the whole of society, our lives, and in the NHS, of course. My just one last thought is something I feel very strongly about in our operation is that strategy is one thing, and effectively this report is strategy, but for it to be effective, you need action. I think that's the big challenge for everyone now, that I often use the phrase strategy is action, you know, because without action, strategy's sort of worthless, if you see what I mean. And so that, how can we make it happen and really raise the standard of patient and staff and visitor food in hospitals and make food important, as it should be and is in the NHS.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Phil, perhaps, obviously you know what you said, but it would be interesting for people, I think, to at least find out what the initial reaction has been that you've seen to the release of the report yesterday.
Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. I think it's certainly been extremely positive, but there's also been some real honesty, advice, support, and I welcome all of it. Picking up on what Paul said particularly, you know, we've often looked back at reviews and relaunching of certain standards, and sometimes we blame other people. And you know, I don't think that Lloyd Grossman and James Martin got everything wrong, that's for sure, okay? But this time around, as far as I'm concerned, this is our report. that's why they asked me as independent, as ex-chair of the HCA. This needs to be a report that we own. We can't blame anyone else. We have to use the recommendations, and it will be about the action. So I suppose the last 24 hours is, for me, it's been around a lot of communication that's been going on. I've reflected a lot on what people have said to me. And now it is about preparation. And just to share a couple of things from yesterday, obviously, to show we were fully supported, we met with the Prime Minister and Secretary of State alongside of Prue, and there was absolute total support, and they really heralded the work of the panel, and the fact that there were people from the NHS that had such a wide input into the report. Even so, to say that now we know it's 48 hospitals that are obviously due to receive support and around the funding as we go forward. And the PM said we must make sure that every hospital that is in that 48 and any others going forward, the catering manager needs to make sure that they are involved in conversations around services for the future. Don't let these buildings happen without us having a say. And I think that, again, gives us another in to dictate what we want for the future.
Okay, good, thank you for that. Craig, if I can turn to you now, looking through some of the questions that we've had in early on, there is one that stands out as saying, why now? In other words, isn't there a danger, and maybe this is a worry you have, that bringing out the report now when there is so much focus on other issues, including COVID-19, of course, that this report could just get sort of lost in the sort of general background noise?
There is that to it, and of course, when is the right time to bring out the report? Obviously, when the report was finished and first accepted would have been nice. Of course it would, but in these uncertain times, looking in our crystal ball at the moment, when would this report have been the right time to be bringing it out? It was desperately unfortunate yesterday that the whole media's attention happened to be on free school meals, and that, which, you know, we fully support, but it's unfortunate that it did take a lot of attention away from the actual launch. We can't avoid that fact, but it is now launched, and it's down to us as the hospital caterers and everybody that supports us in this to get that report onto every chief exec's desk now, and to be trumpeting all those recommendations which are there, and it's down to us. You know, Phil said earlier on, the review can bring out these recommendations, and like Paul said, it's strategy, but it's now is the action. And catering managers and colleagues in the NHS, it's now down to us all to be starting to say, okay, what are we going to do to make this live? Because that's the important thing, it's delivering it. And okay, we do have a crisis which we're working our way through, but we still have day-to-day patients in hospitals that need and expect an improved service. And it's down to us to provide that.
All right, thank you. Paul, perhaps I can turn to you, because that point that Craig has made really is the case, that there have been a number of other reviews in the past looking at hospital food, and I'm sure you're going to be familiar with them. So what is it that the industry can do this time around that will help to ensure that the changes the report recommends actually happen?
Well, I think we all know change is a really challenging thing. You know, making change happen, you know, is incredibly challenging. And I think actually as an industry and as hospital caterers in whatever form, whether at Apetito or in hospitals or anywhere, any other part of the supply chain, we've all got to work together, and we've got to keep the patient in mind, but also there are some funding issues, as Phil has said, and they will in reality be dependent, I guess, on Treasury decisions, and I imagine particularly in the current environment, some of that may be challenging. But I think we've got to keep working on it and keep the pressure up and keep driving to improve. I think for me, one of the most important things is if we can somehow ensure that food has a greater status in a hospital, so that you get that power of three that Phil refers to. And I think achieving that in the end of the day, you know, you can have marvelous food, but if it isn't sort of delivered in the right way in the last 9 yards, then you don't get the result that we're all looking for. So I think probably one of the most important things is getting food central to a hospital you know, operation, if that's the right word.
Okay, thank you for that. Phil, the question of funding has been mentioned a couple of times already. I wonder what you can tell people about any discussions you've had that might suggest your proposals will receive financial backing from the government at some point.
Sure. Can I just pick up on the timing? Sometimes we can't control, as we know, because of March, and I think we've come to a point where if we don't try and launch all this hard work that's happened, then we may lose the opportunity. What we have found out during COVID is that food has never been so important, and the full nutrition aspect for patients, has been picked out, particularly through things like the obesity strategy and also through the national food strategy. But also what has come out through COVID is the well-being for staff. And I think that is going to really help us to develop parts of the report that we thought may lag behind, but actually they've almost jumped ahead. So two things to answer your recent question. There are two elements I think that we're kind of leaning on a little bit. One of them is around legislation, and we all hope that part of the recommendations was to ensure that food standards that come forward need to have legislation. You know, they're not on a piece of paper that you can wave around. They're actually something that we can hold people to account on. So that is one thing that I hope, a bill that can go through the government quite quickly that helps strengthen our food standards. And as you said, around the funding, you know, I was basically told yesterday we've asked for, I mean, at the time it seemed a great deal of money. In current circumstances where a lot of money has been thrown around, it doesn't always seem as much, but I think it's the way we use it. I've always said that money isn't everything in the review, but we do need some capital to help us to move forward. And also we need some money for innovation to support our skills and the way we adapt in the current circumstances. So yeah, I'm quite positive that the spending review in November will show a reflection of the work that we've done, but we need to keep an eye on that.
Right, thank you very much. Craig, we've had a couple of questions in, which seem to be sort of based on the assumption that the review recommends in-house and fresh cook as the way forward. First of all, do you read the review that way? And if not, you know, what's your sort of takeout from the way that the review looks at different ways of delivering food to patients?
Craig? From the outset, no, I don't believe that the simple answer is in-house and fresh cook. I think that we've made that perfectly clear in the report, that really the important thing is getting the decent meal in front of the patient at the right time. And how that is effected doesn't necessarily have to be one. And I know that there was a lot of people who wanted to see. And when we went into the first couple of debates with the review group, I could see that there were people who really wanted just to make that that was
Craig, I think we've lost you. I'm going to have to try and try and move on to someone else now. Phil, can you hear me?
Yeah, of course I can. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry about this, everyone. We seem to have lost contact with Craig there. Phil, someone else was asking about why there were no patients on the review panel. Is that the case? And was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, the conscious decision was to involve the patient association, so we could at least have a much wider field of patient involvement. And when we went to sites as well, we tried to have that contact as well. So again, there was a perspective. We've often had it, and you know, what we're not here to do is tick a box. Okay, we're not here to tick a box to say, oh, you know, we've had a nutrition steering group and we've had a patient representative. You may have had the same patient representative for the last 10 years. You're getting one person's view. And it is really important that we have a patient's view. And to have a patient's view, it needs to be a view from a range of patients. And we spoke actually in a lot of depth with Department of Health. They've worked very closely with the Patient Association in the past, and we were able to get a fantastic perspective. And the great thing is they are there to support us going forward. So we will use their network to ensure that we get that view, and it provides a balance to the report.
Okay, thank you. We were just taking a look at some of the other questions that are coming in. Craig, maybe I can you hear us now, Craig?
Yeah.
Okay. We've got one here about the how confident are you that trust boards will be able to, first of all, back what's happening and support it, because Phil's made the point that that's tremendously important, and then be able to help you to deliver what the review is asking for.
In the report, Phil has made the point about those trusts that we went to where the chief exec and the board are really engaged is where we have really found successful, good quality catering services. And that's what we need to be encouraging our catering managers to be encouraging their boards to buy into this. Yeah, and it needs buy-in, because otherwise it will be just another report. It will just sit on a shelf without people taking those actions. It's up to us, and I've seen somebody saying, will we be bringing it back into the public's attention at a later stage? It's down to us as caterers to actually keep that in the public's mind at the moment, and with the boards. You know, we've got to keep it on the agenda, and with the recommendations, it is being a board thing. It is being something that should be on every board agenda, and with a named person responsible for it. Once you start having named responsibilities for it, somebody on that board is going to take some action because their name's against it. That's the important thing.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Paul, we had a question earlier that I'm going to turn to now, and that's about the possibility that COVID-19 might have seen a shift in patients' food expectations when they're in hospital. And I wondered whether, from your position, that's anything that you'd noticed, or you know, indeed, in a sort of a beyond the COVID question, are patients' expectations of what they should get in hospital, are they changing, and how is the industry adapting to that?
I think of course they're changing. I can't say that personally I can attribute a specific change to COVID-19 in terms of people's tastes, etc. But it's you know, certainly the current environment has inspired us anyway to look at what we're doing. I have a particular hate for the term the new normal, because I feel the new normal is something that sort of happens to you. You know, you're waiting for it, as it were, and we talk about forging the new future. And I think any organisation, you know, the idea you wait for the new normal to come along, you've got to create the future, and I think that's what we're all about. And I think for sure there are going to be changing tastes and expectations, part driven by things like more requirements for plant-based, vegetarian, vegan food, for instance, part which may lead in a similar direction, by the way, by the sustainability arguments and looking to create more sustainable diets. And I think that will have an impact too. And as I mentioned earlier, I think sustainability will be absolutely key in the future, but we have to carry patients and their tastes and expectations with us. We can't just sort of ram it down their throat, as it were. And so we have to provide menus that are increasingly more sustainable, approach our catering services in an increasingly more sustainable way. And returning to the question you had just a few minutes ago, I really think this old fresh fee bought in argument's a bit dead, actually. That's not the key issue. The key issues are around the service, around making sure you can serve great food that can be produced in a number of different ways, about making sure that, you know, in the very last yard it's presented to people hot, you know, it looks great, and all of those issues, and making sure that it's done with care, and making sure perhaps that people who can't eat have support, whether that comes from volunteers or staff, to enable them to eat. Those things make an amazing difference. And you know, we've got to get those absolute frontline touches right, and that is as important as sort of almost, you know, points of principle debate about what sort of system should it be. Well, I'm not sure it makes a lot of difference to the patient, to be quite honest, and it certainly doesn't make any difference to sustainability.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Phil, we've got someone here who's absolutely gung-ho to get cracking on the report recommendations. And the question really is, do you have any sort of timescales or indication of how and when they can start to implement some of the recommendations that you've made?
Yeah. The call to arms for the expert group will happen quite quickly. So what we don't want to do is do anything kind of seen quickly and hurriedly without proper planning. We want people to be on an expert group that actually will be paid for their time, so they actually feel part of that decision making, and trusts are much more likely to let them be part of that. So obviously when the expert group are together, we'll take forward some of the plans, but there are several things that I think are quick wins, and we need to do that to show that things are moving. And obviously once funding is announced in November, then of course we can start to make some wider plans, which are more likely to be year two and possibly 3. But in the first year, we've pulled together an action plan that we will look at. So they will be what I would call year 1 hits, things that we can do straight away, set things up so people can work towards it. And just, you know, I'm just having a quick scan through some of the questions and answers. We're obviously not going to be able to manage to answer everything today, and David, Andrew, I'll leave it in your hands to how that happens. I would love to answer every question, so whether that gets emailed to me or I get these questions, then please, if we could work out the best way of doing that. I think people deserve a response if they've come today. So, but one thing I have picked up is, you know, what's the difference? Well, time will be the difference in the sense of, will we make this work? But as I've said all along, this is not a Prue Leith, a James Martin or a Lloyd Grossman report. This is a report from NHS caterers, and we need to make it work. If it doesn't work, then we just need to look in the mirror, because I'll be looking in the mirror and saying, why did we not get this right? And obviously I will do everything in my power to make it work, but we need everybody together to actually look at their own department. If you get everything right, well, I haven't met any department yet that does, But if you've got everything right, well, congratulations. But if you don't, then be part of what we're trying to do to move forward.
Thanks, Phil. And I mean, to further to your point there about the questions, we'll be doing our best to capture all of the questions that are being posted in the Q&A section, and we can make sure they're circulated to you, Craig and Paul, for your responses. Craig, maybe I can turn to you now. Another question that's come in saying that, of course, most catering teams and managers will be, very keen to improve their offering, but they're also expecting that there will be some opposition to the change. So they're wondering, what will your advice be to your members when dealing with a negative attitude towards change?
Stay solid. Stay solid. Okay. We as hospital caterers know that we can make a difference to patient care, and it is for us to be there banging our drum and not just having to bend to this. Because I saw on it wasn't last Sunday, it was the Sunday before, and I think it was the Mail on Sunday had already seen a copy of this, and already they were saying that recommendations were just totally unrealistic. And there was a nurse on there being quoted saying, we just don't have the time to do this on the wards. Well, quite frankly, that's rubbish. That is part of patients' care. And that is a really important point that I really believe that every single catering manager should be banging and banging and banging on about, because we need to make the time to give the patients the experience that they deserve. They need to be fed properly, and it's our job to provide that. All of us, not just the caterers, but all of the staff around that patient. And everybody should be joining in. And when we talk about food safety and everything, then I seriously believe that everybody involved in the food chain needs to be aware of their responsibilities in all of this. Once they start to understand that, people who aren't directly involved with it, just by being part of the catering team, will actually start to understand that. Andy's just written up here the power of 3. It is immensely powerful, okay? And that is what it's all about, getting everybody around the patient to join in on this. And I hope that this report will help inspire some catering managers, will actually give some the confidence to go to their boards and say, listen, this is what I've been saying for ages. Will you now believe me? And I know that others will be going along to their chief execs, and their chief execs will have already read this because they're in for it.
Right, thank you. Phil, perhaps I can address this one to you. I mean, Prue Leith has sort of spoken out about something as simple as being able to provide, hot toast at the bedside for people as a sort of breakfast or snack option. We had a heartfelt plea from someone earlier asking, how do other people provide hot toast? So any sort of tips or advice on doing something quite as simple, but probably quite effective in its own way?
Personally, I use a toaster.
It's a very good answer.
And for some reason, why a fire officer can dictate to hospitals that a toaster is unmanageable. Nothing is unmanageable. You put the appropriate risk alongside of it, and you manage that risk, and rightly so. If we can't get our patients toast when it is appropriate for them to have it, then I think it's a pretty poor show. So this, again, this gives us the ability, I think, to step forward and say, that the report reflects simple things that we should be able to provide to ensure that, I mean, there are some areas in the hospital that, particularly something like day surgery, where toast and a drink is all they have before they leave, to ensure that at least they're up and about, and at least they're ready to leave. So it's something basic. There are lots of basic things that we often don't provide in the hospital. So we need to provide enough beverages, enough snacks to support beverages. We need good breakfast. I mean, there are some places we visited that are actually still doing cooked breakfasts. You know, is that something, again, we should be looking at, where we look at, you know, a bigger breakfast and maybe less at lunch or less at supper? So it's different for everybody. And picking up also, you know, the conversations as well around fresh food. There's a lot of colleagues here today that I've worked with, and they're also leading hospitals that have got a fresh cooked kitchen, and it is absolutely fantastic. And I would always support the use of our skills, the use of our local suppliers. But what we have to understand, that unless we're going to use billions and billions, we cannot just wipe the face of what we're doing now. But what we can do, picking up on Paul's point, is maximizing what we have right now to the best standard possible. So as we've already said, let's innovate, let's bring things right to the top, and let's start to be proud of what we do.
Right, thank you. Paul, perhaps I can turn to you now. I know you addressed the point of about sustainability briefly in a previous answer, but someone here is asking about the opportunity that the review provides to reduce the impact on the environment, because the NHS and public procurement could have such a potentially huge impact on that. Is that something that you see that can come out of this review?
I think, I mean, for sure, it's embedded in the review, and I think it is going to be absolutely critical. Our need to slow down global warming right across the society, and the food industry as a whole will have a important role in that. I have an immense frustration in this area with what I tend to call greenwash, and you get a lot of statements of, oh, everyone should do this there, everyone should do that. What actually matters in this area is understanding the nature of your carbon footprint, for example. You know, what actually drives your carbon footprint. And, you know, food miles, for instance, as an argument, there's a case, of course, supporting local suppliers, but food mile, for instance, has been debunked over the years. Transport is a tiny, tiny proportion of food carbon footprint. And so if I take Apetito, we're working at the moment on signing up, well, hoping to move towards signing up to a science-based target, where you actually look at this with a science organisation what your carbon footprint is, and then you work on mitigation to reduce it. And of course, you focus then on the most important things. So the raw materials we use, the food we use, is 75% of our carbon footprint. And so focusing on how can we influence that will be the most important thing. And so the number one thing in that carbon footprint, as it happens, is beef. So, as I mentioned, more sustainable diets, but probably more important than beef is wastage. You know, and tackling, if we really, you know, if we genuinely want to reduce the environmental impact, it's not about starting with the answer, you know, and then going up, deciding the answer's this, organic or something, whatever it happens to be. It's about actually doing some analysis, proper science-based analysis, understanding what the issues, understanding what really drives the carbon footprint in your hospital or your service or whatever it happens to be, and then tackling the most important issues with an aim to reduce it by X amount. And by applying that science, we'll deliver far more. And that's what sustainability will become more and more and more about that in the UK, in all industry sectors, because if we're going to make a difference and slow global warming, that is what we're actually going to have to do.
Right, thank you for that, Paul. We are coming towards the end of our hour now, so I wanted to use the remaining moments that we've got to go around the panel and just get their thoughts on what they suspect might be the biggest obstacles to the review recommendations being acted upon. Craig, do you mind kicking off with this one? Possibly telling us also how we might sort of act to sort of minimise any of those obstacles?
Okay, there are going to be obstacles, of course, and we'd be naive to say that there isn't. We had hoped for a clear run at the outset with getting a substantial investment into the catering department, not only for technology, for the ordering systems at ward level, but equally for the equipment in the kitchens. The current crisis has meant that the public purse has been so open to other things that it is going to be difficult to get total focus on investment, but it is down to us to be really bringing that to the fore and really sort of fighting our corner. We have got to get over this thing about thinking that we will not get the investment because clinical needs come first. We're starting to get to a stage where a lot of our infrastructure simply needs to be replaced, and that's been proven by visits that we've made. And that is going to be something that's got to be taken into account.
Okay, thank you. Paul, what do you think might sort of be the sort of the biggest hurdles that have to be overcome in terms of getting this review properly acted upon?
Clearly, the investment challenges are a big challenge. And I recognise that, and many different people listening to this be in different situations with regard to that. The only thing I'd also say is all my experience in my career is that the people who get things done are the people who take personal responsibility. It isn't always easy, and of course, not everything's going for them, and they can't always get the backing. But actually, people who take action, take personal responsibility for making change happen. That's how change happens. And they keep hammering on the door, and they keep fighting, and they take small actions to prove that change can work. Whatever actions within your power to prove that change can work and you can make improvements. We're all responsible, personally responsible, for making this change happen. And the people who look in the mirror and take personal responsibility rather than look out the window and blame somebody else always get more done.
Right, thank you.
Controversial, but
well, that's fine. Phil, final word to you, please. Just on your sort of thoughts on what might prove to be sort of a stumbling block or two along the way.
Okay, well, first of all, massive thank you to everybody, for obviously joining us today, but this is just the start. There is a lot to do. There are some barriers, of course. We know that things like income is a barrier in hospitals because of our retail areas, and COVID is providing a real problem. We know that finance could well be a barrier if we don't get what we need and how we use it. So just two things to add to that. First of all, our decision making. It needs to be joined. Okay, not just between us together today, but between dietitians, between nurses, and between us as caterers. The other thing is as well, for me, the biggest obstacle is not taking up the challenge. And I challenge everyone now, be part of this journey that we've got, be part of this opportunity. And please, when we have a call to arms, I would prefer that hundreds apply, not 2 or 3. We would love people to be part of what we're trying to do, so we can turn around and say, as an independent review, we've made this happen.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm afraid that has to be it from us for today. My thanks once again to Phil, Craig, and Paul, and to you for joining us today, and especially to Apetito for supporting today's webinar. We will be posting a link to a full recording of this in the webinar section of our Public Sector Catering website, and we will be back with you on November the 19th when, on behalf of the Public Sector Catering 100 group, we will be hosting a webinar on its 20% less but better meat campaign. That starts at 11 a.m. in the morning, and you can find out how to register on the Public Sector Catering website. See you on the 19th. Goodbye.
Goodbye.